The heavy oak doors of the county courthouse had barely swung shut behind me when a solid piece of polished wood slammed directly into my chest. I stumbled back, my leather purse slipping off my shoulder as I gasped for air. The silver tip of my mother-in-law's walking cane was pressed hard against my collarbone, digging into my skin through the thin fabric of my blouse. Vesper stood there on the sun-baked concrete steps of the courthouse plaza, her face twisted into that familiar, terrifying sneer she reserved only for me. The midday sun was beating down on us, reflecting off the glass windows of the surrounding buildings, but the look in her eyes was absolutely freezing. Behind her, my newly minted ex-husband Stellan adjusted the cuffs of his $4,000 Navy suit. He had his hands casually slipped into his pockets, and a devastatingly arrogant smirk was playing on his lips. He looked like a man who had just conquered the entire world and was enjoying watching a bug get crushed under a boot. We had just finalized our divorce minutes ago. 25 years of my life, my sweat, my tears, and the inheritance my father left me, all poured into building Apex Cold Chain Solutions from a single, rusted rented truck into a massive transportation logistics empire. All of it had just been legally severed by a tired judge's gavel in a stuffy courtroom. My chest felt hollow, like someone had reached in and scooped out my lungs, but my mind was racing a million miles a minute. Vesper leaned in close. Her expensive, suffocating floral perfume washed over me, making my stomach turn. Her voice was a vicious, dripping hiss that carried easily across the open courtyard, turning the heads of several lawyers and civilians walking past. "Don't ever set foot in my house again," she spat, her eyes wide with malicious glee. "You are nothing but a pathetic dispatcher who got lucky riding my son's coattails. Now get out of our lives, stay away from our money, and get out of my estate." Her words felt like a physical blow, heavy and suffocating. It was a painful, agonizing reminder of every late night I had spent shivering in freezing warehouses routing freight while they slept in warm beds. It was a reminder of every sacrifice I made, every holiday I missed, only to be reduced to dirt beneath her imported Italian leather shoes. The sheer humiliation of being spoken to like a stray, diseased dog in public made my vision blur with hot, blinding anger. I could feel my fingernails digging into the palms of my hands so hard they were almost drawing blood. But I did not cry. I had stopped crying months ago. My tears had dried up and turned into something much harder, much colder. The stakes were far too high now, and the secret resting safely inside my worn leather purse was too heavy, too powerful to let a few cruel words break me. I looked down at the cane still pressing firmly into my chest. I took a slow, deliberate breath, forcing my heart rate to steady. I looked up at Vesper's hateful, wrinkled eyes and finally at Stellan, who was watching me like I was a tragic, broken toy that he had finally gotten bored of playing with. I took another deep breath, letting the hot summer air fill my lungs, and I smiled. It was a small, genuine smile that seemed to confuse them both instantly. "Actually, Vesper," I said softly, making sure my voice was completely steady and devoid of the fear she so desperately wanted to hear. "I just sold this estate this morning. The funds have already cleared escrow." Vesper frowned deeply, the wrinkles on her forehead deepening as her grip on the cane loosened just a fraction of an inch. "What are you talking about? What sale? Delphine, what kind of cicla is this?" Her face barely registered the confusion before I delivered the rest of the devastating payload. I kept my eyes locked directly on Stellan as I spoke. "And Stellan lost his $100 million CEO role about an hour ago. The board has been notified." For 3 full seconds, the world simply stopped spinning. The traffic on the street behind us seemed to mute itself completely. The wind died down. Nobody breathed. Then, Stellan threw his head back and let out a loud, booming, echoing laugh. It was not a nervous laugh. It was the deep, overly confident chuckle of a man who firmly believed he held the entire universe in the palm of his hand. "Delphine," he said, shaking his head slowly and clicking his tongue as if pitying a delusional child. "You have always had such a wild, unhinged imagination. It is sad, really. I think you actually need psychiatric help." Vesper joined in immediately, her harsh, grating cackle scraping against my eardrums. You truly think anyone believes your pathetic delusions? You own nothing. You built nothing. You are nothing. Go back to whatever cheap, roach-infested apartment you crawled into and leave high society to the people who belong there. I did not answer them. There was absolutely no point in arguing with people who were willingly, happily blind to the massive avalanche hanging right above their heads. They wanted to live in a fantasy world where I was powerless, and I was going to let them stay there for exactly a few more seconds. Instead of speaking, I reached into my purse, pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope, and held it out directly to Vesper. "These are the legal instructions from the closing attorney," I stated, my tone entirely flat and professional. "You have exactly 72 hours to remove your personal belongings from the property before the demolition crew arrives to tear the place down to the foundation." She did not take the envelope. She just stared at it like it was a venomous snake ready to strike her hand. Stellan stepped forward abruptly, aggressively swatting my hand away so hard the envelope fluttered to the concrete ground between us. "You have officially lost your damn mind," he sneered, his eyes turning ice cold and entirely devoid of the man I used to know. "Do not ever contact us again, Delphine. Have some dignity and crawl away quietly." He grabbed his mother's frail arm and practically dragged her toward his sleek, black luxury sedan waiting idling at the curb. I watched as the driver opened the door for them. As they drove away, the tinted windows rolling up to shield them from the reality of the world, leaving me standing completely alone on the courthouse steps, I felt a strange, overwhelming sense of calm wash over my entire body. Stellan needed to believe I was crazy. He needed to believe I was a hysterical, bitter ex-wife making empty threats. Because if he admitted, even for a fraction of a single second, that I was not bluffing, everything he had built his entire identity around would shatter into a million irreparable pieces. His pride was his armor, but it was also the exact thing that was going to blind him to his own execution. You are probably sitting there wondering how a marriage of over 2 decades turned into such a toxic, radioactive war zone. You are wondering how a woman who supposedly owned nothing, who was treated like an entry-level secretary by her own family, managed to strip a powerful, connected man of his massive empire in a single morning. To understand the explosion, you have to know exactly how the powder keg was built. And trust me, the fuse was lit long before today. It started in the dark, cold corners of a marriage that looked perfect from the outside, but was rotting from the inside out. If you asked people in our social circle when my marriage ended, most of them would point directly to the divorce papers. They would say it was a sudden tragedy, a classic case of a couple growing apart after the kids left the nest. But marriages do not end in courtrooms. They do not end when a judge hits a wooden block with a mallet. They end in the quiet, devastating, invisible moments that pile up over years and years. They end in a mental museum of pain, where every exhibit is a distinct memory of betrayal, dismissal, and profound, soul-crushing disrespect. Looking back 6 months ago, I was still desperately, foolishly trying to keep our sinking ship afloat. Apex Cold Chain Solutions was not just a corporate entity to me, it was my third child. I nurtured it. I bled for it. I remembered the early days clearly. The first exhibit in my mental museum was a heavy, grease-stained, foul-smelling winter jacket hanging in the very back of my closet. 15 years ago, during the absolute worst, most brutal blizzard of the entire decade, the refrigeration unit on truck number 42 failed completely. It was carrying $200,000 worth of highly sensitive, life-saving medical supplies. If the temperature dropped below freezing inside that trailer, the entire load would be ruined, and the penalty clauses in our contract would have bankrupted us instantly. Stellan was at a warm, cozy networking dinner downtown, sipping expensive red wine, eating filet mignon, and conveniently turning his cell phone completely off. I was the one who drove out to the frozen, ice-covered highway at 2 in the morning. I put on that massive jacket, crawled under the filthy trailer in the freezing, biting sleet, and guided the exhausted mechanic via a frantic, screaming phone call to bypass the compressor and save the cargo. My hands were completely numb, bleeding from the cold metal. I caught a severe case of pneumonia that night that put me in bed for a week. When Stellan finally came home, he did not ask how I was. He only complained that my violent coughing was keeping him awake and asked me to sleep on the sofa downstairs. The second exhibit was a scanned copy of a cashier's check saved on my private computer hard drive. $350,000. It was the life insurance payout from my late mother. Back in 2011, when the recession hit the logistics industry like a freight train, Apex was bleeding cash daily. The banks literally laughed at Stellan when he walked in wearing his fancy suits to ask for a loan extension. We were exactly 3 days away from missing payroll for 80 hardworking drivers. 80 families were going to miss their mortgage payments because of our failure. I sat in our cramped, poorly lit home office, holding the check that represented my mother's entire lifetime of frugal saving, and I endorsed it over to the company. I handed it directly to Stellan, looked him in the eyes, and told him to save our people. That money did not buy us luxury cars or vacations. It bought us pure survival. And that brutal, scraping survival eventually bloomed into a $100 million corporate valuation. But the most painful exhibit, the one that finally took a hammer and cracked the thick glass of my denial, happened at the annual Supply Chain Excellence Awards dinner hosted in a massive, glittering ballroom in downtown Chicago. Apex had just one Carrier of the Year. It was the highest honor in our region. I sat at table number 4, wearing a simple, understated black dress I had bought off the rack at a department store 5 years prior. I was never one for flashy diamond jewelry or expensive designer labels. I preferred spending my personal money on upgrading the GPS routing systems in our trucks to keep our drivers safe. Stellan walked onto the brightly lit stage, the spotlight tracking his every move. He looked like a silver screen movie star. The crowd of 500 industry professionals erupted into thunderous applause. I started this company with nothing but a bold vision and a whole lot of American grit. He spoke into the microphone, his voice incredibly smooth, deep, and perfectly practiced. I worked 20-hour days, sacrificing my own well-being to ensure that Apex became the gold standard of cold chain logistics in this country. More massive applause echoed through the room. I sat there at table 4, my hands folded tightly in my lap, waiting. My heart was beating a little faster. Surely, I thought to myself, surely he would mention the people who actually kept the engines running. The dispatchers working graveyard shifts, the mechanics covered in oil, the drivers pulling grueling overnight routes away from their children. And maybe, just maybe, he would mention the wife who financed the survival of his entire dream with her dead mother's money. I want to thank my incredible executive team, Stellan continued, his eyes scanning the wealthy crowd, deliberately looking right over my head. And I want to give a very special, heartfelt thanks to our new Vice President of Operations, Tamsin, whose brilliant strategic mind has taken us to unprecedented new heights this past year. Tamsin, a 26-year-old former marketing assistant who had been with the company for barely 8 months and whose primary professional skills seemed to be wearing skirts that blatantly violated the corporate dress code and giggling at Stellan's terrible jokes. She stood up from the VIP table at the very front of the room, waving enthusiastically to the crowd, blowing a kiss toward the stage. Stellan beamed down at her with a look of pure adoration. "Thank you all for believing in my empire," he finished, raising his glass. I clapped politely because every single other person in the room was clapping. But deep inside my chest, something vital and load-bearing finally snapped in half. It was not petty jealousy over a younger, prettier woman. It was the profound, suffocating, nauseating realization that I had spent half my entire life building a magnificent throne for a man who did not even realize I was standing in the room. That night, I drove back to our hotel alone. Stellan sent a text saying he had to stay late for the executive after-party to network with investors. When I walked into our dark house the next day, the silence felt incredibly heavy, like water filling my lungs. 2 days later, the final, fatal blow landed. I had just finished a brutal 12-hour shift managing a massive route diversion due to a freak snowstorm shutting down the highways in Denver. I walked into the kitchen, exhausted to my bones, my shoulders aching with tension. On the granite island, right next to a pile of unopened junk mail, sat a thick, pristine manila folder. I opened it. Divorce papers. No argument preceding it. No couples therapy. No late-night conversations about our feelings. Just a bright yellow sticky note pointing exactly to where I needed to sign my life away. Next to the heavy legal folder was a glossy, expensive travel brochure for the Maldives. It was open to a page showing luxury water villas hovering over crystal blue water. In the corner of the page, written in bubbly pink ink with a little hand-drawn heart next to it, were the words, "Our celebration trip. Love, T." My breath hitched violently in my throat. I stood in the dim, cold light of the kitchen, tracing the pink ink with my trembling thumb. Stellan had not just erased me from the company history. He was actively erasing me from his entire life, and he was doing it with the casual, breezy indifference of someone throwing out a bag of old, rotting garbage. The next few weeks were a dizzying blur of cold, calculated cruelty that left me feeling like I was losing my grip on reality. Stellan immediately moved his things into a luxury high-rise condo downtown, claiming he needed physical and mental space to process the difficult transition. But he left his mother, Vesper, squarely planted in the large suburban estate we had shared for 20 years. The house technically belonged to my parents before they passed away, a sprawling, slightly outdated, but deeply loved property that sat on 3 acres of prime real estate surrounded by old oak trees. Vesper took it upon herself to begin the brutal eviction process before the lawyers even had their first preliminary meeting. She treated me like an unwanted squatter in the home I had grown up in. One Tuesday afternoon, I came home early from the office because a stress-induced migraine was threatening to split my skull completely in two. I walked through the heavy wooden front door, kicked off my shoes, and froze dead in my tracks. The entire front hallway was lined with tall, brown cardboard boxes. I heard a crash and ran toward the dining room. Vesper was standing in the center of the room, holding a delicate, hand-painted ceramic plate. It was part of a priceless set my grandmother had painstakingly brought over from Europe after the war, the absolutely only tangible piece of family history I had left in the world. Vesper carelessly, casually tossed it into a massive box labeled donation trash with a thick black marker. "What the hell are you doing?" I asked, my voice trembling violently as I rushed forward to stop her. Vesper did not even flinch at my tone. She casually grabbed another irreplaceable plate from the china cabinet. "I am clearing out this hideous, dusty clutter. Tamsin prefers a very clean, minimalist aesthetic. She finds old things depressing. We are gutting this entire floor next month to install imported white marble, and I am not working around your junk." I reached out and grabbed her thin wrist, stopping her from throwing the second plate into the box. "These belong to my family. This is my house, Vesper. You cannot touch these." Vesper ripped her arm away with surprising strength, looking at me with an expression of pure, unfiltered disgust. "Oh, please, Delphine. Stop embarrassing yourself like a hysterical child. Stellan is taking this entire house in the settlement. You do not seriously think a woman who just answers phones and types numbers into a computer all day deserves a massive property like this? You are a dispatcher. Know your place in the world." Right at that exact agonizing moment, the front door opened and Stellan walked in. He looked between the towering boxes, his mother's furious face and my pale, shocked expression. "Is there a problem here?" he asked calmly, loosening his silk tie and setting his expensive leather briefcase on the floor. "Your mother is throwing away my grandmother's heirlooms," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously low, shaking register. Stellan sighed heavily, running a manicured hand through his thick hair like he was dealing with a stubborn, unruly toddler in a grocery store. "Delphine, we are just trying to modernize the space. You hold on to the past way too much. It is unhealthy. Just take your little plates, wrap them up, and put them in the trunk of your car. You will be moving out very soon anyway. I have already told my legal team I am keeping the property." I stared intently at the man I had loved for decades. The man I had sacrificed my physical health and my entire inheritance for. He looked at me with such immense, blinding superiority, so completely certain of his absolute victory. "What exactly do you think I did for Apex all these years?" I asked him, the words tasting like bitter ash in my mouth. He chuckled, a short, incredibly dismissive sound that made my blood boil. You managed the spreadsheets, Delphine. You routed a few trucks when the weather got bad. It is basic, entry-level administrative work. I am the one who secured the multi-million-dollar contracts. I am the one who built the relationships with the vendors. Do not inflate your worth just because you are feeling angry and bitter about the divorce. He patted my shoulder, a condescending, mocking gesture that made my skin crawl with revulsion, and walked upstairs to pack a weekend bag for whatever getaway he had planned with his mistress. If you have ever been looked dead in the eye by someone you deeply loved, someone you bled for, and had your entire life's work reduced to absolutely nothing, you know the exact kind of suffocating, violent rage I felt in that moment. It is a fire that burns all the oxygen out of the room until you cannot breathe. I need to know I am not crazy here. If you are watching this, let me know down in the comments, what would you have done right then? Because the choice I made next set the entire corporate world on fire, and I want to know if you would have done the exact same thing. That night, I sat alone on the hard wooden floor of the guest bedroom, carefully wrapping my grandmother's surviving plates in old newspaper. The large house was dead quiet. Vesper was asleep down the hall, snoring softly, and Stellan had left hours ago. I felt entirely, profoundly alone, a ghost haunting the very life I had built with my own two bare hands. Then, at exactly 11:45 at night, the screen of my phone buzzed brightly on the nightstand, illuminating the dark room. I wiped my eyes and glanced at the screen. It was a text message from Yora, the senior chief accountant at Apex. Yora was a quiet, meticulous, deeply religious man in his late 60s who had been with our company since the very early garage days. He was a creature of intense habit. He went to bed at 9. He never, ever texted me this late. The message read, Delphine, I am so deeply sorry to bother you at this hour. But I have found something hidden in the master ledger. A massive financial anomaly. You absolutely cannot tell Stellan I contacted you. Please, meet me at the old diner on Route 9 tomorrow morning at exactly 6. Come completely alone. My heart began to hammer violently against my ribs, loud in the silent room. Yora was not a man prone to exaggeration or dramatics. If he was using words like massive financial anomaly and sneaking around behind the CEO's back in the middle of the night, something absolutely catastrophic was happening. I did not sleep a single wink that night. I sat in a chair by the bedroom window, wrapped in a blanket, watching the pale moonlight cast long, terrifying shadows across the driveway, counting the seconds until the sun began to rise. The flickering neon sign of the Route 9 diner cast a sickly, erratic red glow in the gray, freezing morning light. The air inside the small restaurant smelled heavily of stale black coffee, ancient frying oil, and burnt bacon. I slid quietly into the cracked red vinyl booth across from Yora. He looked absolutely terrible. The deep, dark bags under his eyes suggested he had not slept in several days, and his hands were trembling slightly as he held his coffee mug. He didn't waste any time with pleasantries or small talk. He immediately reached into his worn briefcase and pushed a thick, red-bound folder across the sticky, syrup-stained table toward me. I have been conducting the internal quarterly audit for the past 3 weeks, Yora said, his voice dropping to a harsh, terrified whisper. Stellan abruptly restricted my administrative access to the executive expense accounts 2 months ago. He claimed the IT department was migrating us to a new, highly secure software system. But he forgot that I still have emergency backdoor access through the old legacy servers you built for us back in 2010. I opened the heavy red folder. Inside were pages upon pages of dense financial spreadsheets, with dozens of lines highlighted in bright neon yellow ink. I am a logistics expert by trade, but running a business for 25 years meant I knew exactly how to read a complicated balance sheet. As my tired eyes scanned the columns of numbers, a cold, sickening dread began to pool heavily in the pit of my stomach. Look carefully at page 12, Yora instructed, pointing a shaking, wrinkled finger at a specific, highlighted line item near the bottom. The line was vaguely labeled Strategic Fleet Expansion. The outgoing wire transfer was for exactly $1,800,000. We didn't buy any new trucks or equipment this quarter, I said, my brow furrowing in deep confusion. Our fleet is fully updated. Where on earth did this money go? Yora swallowed hard, looking over his shoulder nervously before answering. It went directly to a blind shell holding company registered in Delaware. I paid a private investigator a few $100s out of my own pocket to pull the public records on that specific company, Delphine. It is owned 100% by Stellan. He used our company operating funds to purchase a luxury yacht docked right now in Miami. I found the registration. He named the boat the Tamsin. My breath caught painfully in my throat. $1,800,000. Stolen. But that is not even the worst part, Yora continued, his eyes filling with a profound, heavy sadness that made my heart ache. Look closely at where he pulled the working capital from to cover the massive cash flow gap he created. I flipped the page with trembling fingers. My eyes widened in absolute, unadulterated horror as I read the ledger. Stellan had quietly, systematically liquidated a massive portion of the Driver Health and Wellness Reserve Fund, and he had drastically reduced the company match on the employee retirement pension accounts across the board. My hands began to shake violently, rattling the table. I instantly thought of Oaks. Oaks was our senior fleet manager, a rough, hard-working man who had driven long-haul routes for us for 20 loyal years. 2 weeks ago, Oaks had suffered a mild heart attack on the job. When I visited him, he told me the company insurance provider had suddenly denied coverage for his vital cardiac rehab program, claiming a sudden change in our policy tiers. I had naively assumed it was a standard bureaucratic error and promised to look into it. He stole from them, I whispered, the crushing reality of the situation crashing down on me like a physical weight. He literally stole the medicine from our drivers to buy a luxury boat for his young mistress. Yora nodded slowly, wiping his brow. He also created a phantom vendor account in our system. He has been paying Tamsin a fake consulting fee of $40,000 every single month on top of her regular executive salary. Delphine, it is blatant embezzlement. It is corporate fraud on a massive, terrifying scale. If the board of directors finds out, or worse, if the federal regulators catch wind of this, Apex will be completely destroyed. Over 200 hardworking people will lose their jobs, their pensions, and their livelihoods. The dirty diner faded away. The strong smell of coffee completely disappeared. I wasn't thinking about my broken, ruined marriage anymore. I wasn't thinking about the divorce papers sitting on the counter, or the house Vesper was trying to steal from me. I was thinking about Oaks sitting in a bleak hospital waiting room, terrified and worrying about how to pay for his heart medicine, while Stellan drank expensive champagne on a stolen yacht. Yora leaned in closer, his voice cracking. And there is one more thing I found. I saw an email draft accidentally left open on his assistant's computer screen yesterday. Stellan is planning to legally drain the college trust fund you set up for Lyra. He is going to use her tuition money to cover a massive personal tax liability Tamsin incurred from a luxury real estate purchase last year. He plans to execute the transfer next Tuesday. A brand new, terrifying kind of anger ignited deep inside my chest. It was not the hot, chaotic, crying anger of a betrayed, heartbroken wife. It was the absolute cold, hyper-focused, lethal rage of a mother protecting her child, and of a leader protecting her vulnerable people. Stellan had aggressively crossed the line from being a terrible, selfish husband to becoming a dangerous, destructive monster who needed to be stopped permanently. "Thank you, Yora," I said quietly, closing the thick red folder and pulling it firmly toward my chest like a shield. "You did the absolute right thing bringing this to me. What are you going to do?" he asked, looking genuinely terrified of the storm he had just unleashed. "If he finds out I showed you this, if he fires me, I lose my pension, Delphine." "He cannot fire you," I replied, sliding smoothly out of the vinyl booth and standing up straight. "Because he doesn't know who he is actually dealing with yet." I walked out of the diner and back into the freezing morning air. The sadness was completely gone. The hesitation that had plagued me for months was eradicated. Stellan wanted to play the role of a ruthless corporate titan. He wanted to strip my life down to the studs, insult my intelligence, and throw me out in the cold? Fine. But he was about to learn a very painful, very permanent lesson about the structural foundation he built his precious empire on. When I finally drove back to the estate, my mind calculating a dozen different strategies, there was a strange, small car parked erratically in the circular driveway. I hurried inside, my heart skipping a beat, only to find my 22-year-old daughter, Lyra, sitting collapsed on the living room sofa, crying hysterically into a decorative throw pillow. "Lyra, sweetheart, what is wrong?" I asked, dropping my heavy purse to the floor and rushing over to her, reaching out to wrap my arms around her shaking shoulders. She looked up at me, her young eyes red, swollen, and filled with a look of pure betrayal. She violently pulled away when I tried to hug her, shrinking back into the cushions. "Dad came to visit me at my apartment late last night," she choked out, wiping her running nose with the back of her hand. "He told me everything, Mom." "Why are you doing this to us?" "Doing what?" I asked, stepping back, genuinely confused by her accusation. "Why are you trying to completely destroy him?" Lyra cried, her voice cracking with raw emotion. "Dad said you are having a severe, dangerous mental breakdown. He said you are violently jealous of Tamsin because she is younger, that you have been actively sabotaging his important business deals out of spite, and that you threatened to ruin the entire company just to hurt him. He said you are stubbornly refusing to go to therapy and that you want to leave him with absolutely nothing." I sat back hard on my heels on the rug, feeling as though I had been physically punched in the stomach by a heavyweight fighter. Stellan was actively, intentionally poisoning our only daughter against me. He was painting himself as the tragic, long-suffering, patient victim of a crazy, vindictive, emotionally unstable wife. "He told me you are trying to liquidate my college fund so you can hire aggressive, expensive divorce lawyers to ruin him," Lyra sobbed, covering her face with her hands. "Mom, please, just stop it. Let him be happy. He is moving on. Why are you being so bitter and cruel?" The psychological manipulation was so incredibly precise, so unfathomably evil, that it literally took my breath away. He was projecting his exact financial crimes onto me to turn my own beloved child into a weapon against my sanity. He knew Lyra was my weak spot, and he was squeezing as hard as he could. I looked at Lyra's tear-stained, devastated face. I wanted to scream the absolute truth until my lungs bled. I wanted to run to the car, grab the red folder, and throw the embezzlement evidence right into her lap. But she was 22, deeply and inherently attached to her charming father, and currently thoroughly brainwashed by his lies. If I dumped a massive pile of complex accounting fraud evidence on her right now, she would think I fabricated it just like he said I would. I had to show her the truth in a way she could not deny, not just tell her. I gently, very carefully placed my hand on her shaking knee. "Lyra, listen to me. I love you more than life itself. I would never, ever touch a single penny of your college fund. I promise you that on my life. Please, just trust me for a little while longer. The absolute truth will come out very soon, and you will understand everything." She aggressively shook her head, standing up quickly and grabbing her coat. "I can't be around you right now, Mom. You need serious psychiatric help." She practically ran out the front door, leaving me completely alone in the half-packed, silent living room. The heavy click of the front door shutting was the final, definitive lock snapping into place in my mind. Stellan had taken my dignity. He had taken my professional credit. He had compromised my company's integrity. And now he was trying to steal the love of my daughter. I picked up my keys, my hands completely steady now, and drove straight to downtown Indianapolis. I headed to the towering, imposing glass building where the elite law firm of Sterling and Hayes occupied the top 3 floors. I did not have an appointment, but Marin did not care about appointments when it came to me. Marin was a sharp, fiercely practical woman in her late 50s. She was a senior partner at the firm and one of the original, founding board members of Apex Cold Chain Solutions. She was the brilliant attorney who handled the initial corporate incorporation when my father invested his life savings into the company all those years ago. I walked past her protesting secretary, pushed open the door to her massive corner office, and dropped the heavy red folder onto her polished mahogany desk with a loud thud. "I need to initiate an emergency, immediate removal of the CEO," I said without a single word of greeting or preamble. Marin lowered her pen and peered over her silver reading glasses, leaning back in her leather chair. Delphine, you know the board of directors is heavily stacked with Stellan's golfing buddies and yes men. They will never vote to forcefully remove him just because of a messy, unpleasant divorce. They protect their own. I reached out and tapped the cover of the red folder. It is not about the divorce, Marin. He embezzled $1,800,000 from the Driver Health and Pension Fund to buy a luxury yacht for his mistress. He is paying her $40,000 a month in fake, untraceable vendor fees. The absolute, undeniable mathematical proof is all right there. Marin's expression shifted instantly from polite sympathy to the cold, calculating look of an apex predator. She pulled the folder toward her and began flipping rapidly through the pages. The silence in the large office stretched out, broken only by the crisp, sharp rustle of paper and her occasional sharp intake of breath. "This is highly, incredibly illegal," she murmured, her eyes darting quickly across the highlighted spreadsheets. "This is not just a civil dispute, Delphine. This is federal prison territory." But even with this explosive evidence, Stellan still controls a massive block of shares. If we bring this to a standard board vote, his loyalists might try to bury it internally to save their own lucrative portfolios and avoid a public scandal. We need a guaranteed, undeniable voting majority to force an immediate termination for cause. I slumped heavily into the expensive leather chair opposite her desk, rubbing my temples. So he just gets away with it? He ruins all these lives and walks away clean? Marin closed the folder firmly and looked at me for a long, calculating moment. "Delphine, did you forget who drafted the original shareholder agreement 18 years ago?" I frowned, looking up at her. "What do you mean?" Marin stood up, walked over to a massive, reinforced filing cabinet in the corner of the room, and unlocked a heavy metal drawer. She pulled out an incredibly old, yellowing binder, blew a thin layer of dust off the cover, and dropped it onto the desk. "Your father was a very, very shrewd man," she said, opening the binder and flipping carefully to a specific tab labeled Voting Rights Addendum. He knew Stellan was highly ambitious, and he knew blind ambition often breeds dangerous arrogance. When your father handed over that check to save the company, he didn't just buy standard equity. He bought Class A preferred shares. And he put every single one of them entirely, legally in your name. I nodded slowly, still not fully grasping it. "I know I own shares, Marin. But Stellan always told me my stake was minor compared to his founder shares." Marin let out a sharp, genuine laugh that echoed in the room. "Stellan is a colossal idiot who doesn't read the fine print of his own contracts. Look right here at page 42, section C." I leaned forward, squinting to read the dense, complicated legal jargon. My eyes widened dramatically as the mathematical realization hit me like a truck. "Your Class A shares do not carry 1 vote per share," Marin explained, tapping the aged paper with her manicured fingernail. "They carry 10 votes per share. Stellan owns 51% of the total equity, yes. But because of the heavily weighted voting rights legally attached to your specific class of stock, you single-handedly control 65% of the total voting power of Apex Cold Chain Solutions." I stared at the paper, the words blurring together. "You mean I own the company?" Marin smiled, a fierce, brilliant, terrifying smile. "You don't just own it, Delphine. You are a dictator. You have the absolute, unchecked power to hire, fire, dissolve, or restructure. Stellan is merely a passenger on a ship that you own the steering wheel to." "But I have never voted in my entire life," I whispered, my mind reeling with the implications. "Stellan always handled the board meetings." Marin nodded grimly. "Because every single year, exactly 1 month before the annual meeting, his assistant emails you a standard proxy authorization form. You sign it without looking, legally granting him the right to cast your votes on your behalf. He has been using your own immense power to build his throne for a decade. He got comfortable. He forgot where the power actually comes from." She leaned across the desk, her eyes locking intensely onto mine. "The annual shareholder and board meeting is next Thursday morning. Have you signed this year's proxy form yet?" I thought back to the massive pile of unopened junk mail sitting on the kitchen island at the house. No, I haven't even opened the email. Marin closed the binder with a resounding snap. Excellent. Then we are going to war. The next 7 days required a level of intense, suffocating emotional discipline that I did not even know I possessed. I had to actively play the pathetic role of the defeated, broken, hysterical wife while secretly, meticulously arranging the brutal execution of an entire corporate empire. 2 days before the scheduled board meeting, Stellan, his aggressive lawyers, my lawyer, and I sat in a sterile, freezing cold mediation room to finalize the legal division of our marital assets. Stellan was in a spectacular, almost euphoric mood. He had clearly spent the morning at his expensive gym, his hair was perfectly styled, and he was radiating a sickening aura of untouchable, arrogant success. "Let's make this quick, gentlemen," Stellan said, checking his heavy gold watch and sighing dramatically. "I have a first-class flight to Miami this evening, and I do not want to miss it over trivial arguments." His lead attorney slid a heavily formatted spreadsheet across the polished table. "My client is willing to be incredibly generous to expedite this process. He will take the downtown condominium, the liquid brokerage accounts, the Cayman investment portfolio, and the yacht. In exchange for this, he is willing to completely waive all financial claims to the suburban estate and the older vehicles." My attorney, who was fully briefed and coached by Marin on our true, hidden strategy, put on an absolutely incredible, award-winning performance. "But the suburban estate needs a completely new roof, and the plumbing is failing rapidly," she argued, sounding genuinely distressed. "You are leaving my client with a massive financial burden while you take all the actual cash-generating assets. This is highly inequitable." Stellan laughed aloud, leaning back in his expensive chair and crossing his arms over his chest. "That old house is an absolute money pit. Delphine loves the past so much, she can keep it and rot in it. I want liquidity. I want assets that move forward. If she doesn't want the house, we can sell it to a developer and split the meager profits, but I am absolutely not giving up a single one of my investments for it." I looked down at the table, forcing my shoulders to slump deeply, making myself look as small, weak, and defeated as humanly possible. "Fine," I whispered, my voice trembling perfectly, squeezing out a single, fake tear. "I will take the house. Just let me keep my parents' home. It is all I have left." Stellan smirked, exchanging a highly victorious, smug look with his lawyer. "Excellent. Draw up the final paperwork immediately. I want the title transferred solely and exclusively to her name by tomorrow morning." I wiped my hands completely clean of that crumbling property. I signed the settlement agreement with a shaking hand legally, permanently severing the massive house from the marital estate and making it 100% my private property. Stellan truly thought he had just brilliantly conned his emotional wife into taking a massive liability while he walked away with millions in cash. He had absolutely no idea he had just gladly handed me the exact weapon I needed to destroy his mother's beloved sanctuary. The morning of the highly anticipated board meeting finally arrived. The sky over Indianapolis was a crisp, clear, unapologetic blue. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, entirely bypassing the plain, boring black dresses I usually wore to corporate events. Instead, I reached into the back of my closet and put on a sharply tailored, aggressive crimson-red blazer and perfectly fitted black trousers. I pulled my hair back into a sleek, severe professional knot that pulled the skin around my eyes tight. I looked at my reflection. I didn't look like a tired dispatcher anymore. I looked like a shark smelling blood in the water. Downstairs, Stellan was waiting impatiently by the front door, drinking an espresso. He was flying back from Miami just for the meeting. He looked at my bright red outfit and raised a thick eyebrow in blatant mockery. "Dressing up nicely for the unemployment line today?" he mocked, setting his tiny cup down on the entryway table. "Make sure you pack all your little cardboard boxes today, Delphine. Tamsin is moving her things in this weekend, and she explicitly mentioned she doesn't want the place smelling like your cheap vanilla lotion anymore." I picked up my leather purse, feeling the solid, comforting weight of the red audit folder tucked safely inside it. I will be completely out of your way very soon, Stellan, I replied evenly, my voice smooth as glass. You might be very surprised by exactly how much gets cleared out today. He scoffed loudly, turning his back to me and walking toward the door. Just don't make a pathetic, crying scene at the office. I have highly important business to handle today, and I don't have time to babysit your emotions. He walked out, getting into his chauffeured black town car. I followed a few minutes later, driving my own older sedan. As I drove toward the Apex Cold Chain Solutions corporate tower, my phone buzzed sharply on the passenger seat with an urgent email alert. I glanced at the screen at a red light. It was from Stellan's executive assistant. Subject: highly urgent. Annual proxy voting authorization. Message: Hi Delphine, we still haven't received your legally signed proxy form for today's board meeting. Stellan needs this immediately to proceed with the agenda and vote on the new executive appointments. Please sign and return the attachment instantly. I smiled, pulled the car over to the side of the road, and hit delete. I didn't just delete the email. I went into the system and permanently erased it from the trash folder. The silence of that deleted email was the loudest, most powerful sound I had ever made in my entire life. I pulled into the underground parking garage of the massive Apex building. The elevator ride up to the 40th floor felt like it took an entire hour. My heart was beating a steady, powerful, war drum rhythm against my ribs. I wasn't afraid. The fear had burned away in the diner days ago. All that was left was cold, hard, calculating resolve. When the polished metal elevator doors dinged open, the executive lobby was buzzing frantically with activity. Receptionists were answering blinking phone lines. Junior executives were rushing around with tablets, preparing for the big meeting. Nobody in that lobby knew that the very foundation of the company they worked for was about to be hit by a magnitude 9 seismic earthquake. I walked straight past the front desk, completely ignoring the confused, wide-eyed look of the head receptionist who was used to seeing me in a high-vis safety vest down in the freezing warehouse, not strutting onto the executive floor in crimson red. I reached out and pushed open the heavy, soundproof glass doors to the main boardroom. The long game of silent chess was officially over. It was time to flip the board completely upside down. The massive, soundproof glass doors of the boardroom felt heavy against my hands, but I pushed them open with a smooth, undeniable force. The room inside was a monument to corporate excess. A long, polished mahogany table stretched across the center, surrounded by plush leather chairs. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a dizzying, panoramic view of the Indianapolis skyline. Stellan sat at the very head of the table, looking every bit the untouchable king of his empire. His loyal vice president, Kalen, a man who had built his entire career on agreeing with whatever Stellan said, was currently pouring him a cup of sparkling water. Through the glass walls, I could see Tamsin sitting in the plush waiting area outside. She was wearing a designer skirt suit, her legs crossed, sipping a latte. She was just waiting for the vote to conclude so Stellan could call her in and officially crown her the new chief operating officer. When I walked in, the quiet hum of pre-meeting chatter died instantly. Every single head turned to look at me. The silence was thick, heavy, and very uncomfortable. Stellan paused, his glass halfway to his mouth. His confident smile faltered for a fraction of a second before twisting into a look of sheer, unadulterated annoyance. "Delphine," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "This is a closed executive board meeting. You are not supposed to be in here. The mediation is over. Go home." I ignored him entirely. I walked smoothly down the length of the room, my heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. I pulled out the chair directly opposite of him, right next to Marin, and sat down. I placed my red leather purse on the table. "I am a member of the board," I replied, keeping my voice very even and calm. "I have every legal right to be here." Stellan let out a harsh, mocking sigh, looking around the room at his golfing buddies as if asking them to share in his misery. "You are a silent board member by courtesy only. You have never attended a meeting in your life. And frankly, your presence today is entirely inappropriate given our personal circumstances. We have crucial operational votes to cast. Security can escort you out if you refuse to leave." Maren, sitting to my left, neatly folded her hands over her legal notepad. She looked up at Stellan, her expression unreadable. Actually, Stellan, Delphine's presence is not just appropriate. It is legally mandatory for this meeting to proceed. Stellan frowned, his eyes darting between Maren and me. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. What are you talking about, Maren? I hold the proxy authorization for her shares. I cast her votes. It has been that way for a decade. She doesn't need to be here. Maren reached into her briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a printed copy of the proxy authorization email his assistant had sent me that morning. No, she stated coldly. You do not hold the proxy. Delphine did not sign the authorization this year. The digital signature is missing, and the deadline passed exactly 10 minutes ago. The color drained slightly from Stellan's face. He looked at Kaylin, who suddenly looked very nervous. Stellan cleared his throat, trying to regain his composure. Fine. So she forgot to sign an email. It is a technicality. She can just vote with me today. My 51% majority stands regardless. Let's move on to the first agenda item. The confirmation of Tamsin as Chief Operating Officer. I reached into my purse and pulled out the thick, heavy red folder Yora had given me. I laid it flat on the mahogany table. The bright red cover seemed to glow ominously in the sterile room. We are not voting on Tamsin, I said, my voice cutting through the tension like a razor blade. Stellan slammed his hand flat on the table, his temper finally breaking through his polished facade. Enough. I am the chief executive officer of this company. I control the majority. I make the decisions. You do not get to walk in here, throw a tantrum because you are bitter about our divorce, and disrupt my business. Maren picked up her wooden gavel and tapped it sharply against the sounding block, the sharp crack silencing him. You do not control the majority, Stellan, Maren declared, her voice ringing out with undeniable authority. You own 51% of the equity. But you do not own the voting power. Stellan stared at her, genuine confusion washing over his face. What are you talking about? Equity is voting power. Maren smiled, and it was a terrifying thing to witness. Not when you are dealing with Class A preferred shares, Stellan. Did you ever bother to read the foundational charter when Delphine's father bailed this company out 18 years ago? Delphine's shares carry a 10-to-1 weighted voting ratio. A collective, audible gasp echoed around the boardroom. Several of the older board members sat up straight, their eyes wide with shock. Kaylin dropped his pen, the plastic clattering loudly against the table. Maren continued, her words hitting Stellan like physical punches. Without her proxy signature, your voting power is mathematically reduced to a minority. Delphine currently holds 65% of the voting rights in this room. You are not in charge here today, Stellan. She is. Stellan's jaw literally dropped. He stared at me, his eyes wide and wild, searching my face for any sign that this was an elaborate, cruel joke. But there was no joke. There was only the cold, hard reality of his own staggering arrogance. He had been so busy building his empire, so busy treating me like a disposable stepping stone, that he never realized I was the one holding the deed to the land he built it on. This is absurd, Stellan stammered, his voice losing its deep, confident timbre. This is a hostile takeover. You cannot just come in here and hijack my company. It is not a hijack, I replied, resting my hand on the red folder. It is an eviction. At that exact moment, the boardroom doors opened again. Yora, the senior chief accountant, walked in. He looked terrified, sweating profusely in his cheap suit, but he walked straight to the table. He carried 5 identical copies of the red folder. He began passing them out to the other board members. What is this? Stellan demanded, his voice rising in panic. Yora, what are you doing in here? You do not have clearance for this floor. Yora did not look at him. He looked at me, gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod, and stepped back against the wall. I opened my copy of the folder. I looked directly into Stellan's panicked eyes. We are not voting on executive promotions today, Stellan. We are voting on your immediate termination for gross misconduct, corporate fraud, and the embezzlement of $1,800,000 from the employee health and pension funds. The silence that followed was deafening. It was the sound of a massive, unstoppable bomb finally reaching zero. Chaos erupted in the boardroom. The older directors, men who had trusted Stellan for years, were tearing open their red folders. The sound of pages turning rapidly filled the air, followed closely by sharp intakes of breath and muttered curses. Stellan leaped out of his chair, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. "These are forged," he screamed, pointing a shaking finger at Yora. "This is a conspiracy. She paid him to fabricate these documents to ruin me in the divorce settlement." Yora stood his ground, though his hands were trembling. "Those are raw exports directly from the legacy servers, sir. Every single wire transfer is verified. Every hidden account is logged with your personal digital signature. The Delaware Shell Company is registered under your social security number. It is all there." Marin took over, steering the execution with ruthless efficiency. "Look at page 14, gentlemen. You will see $40,000 monthly payments directed to a phantom vendor account. That money was routed directly to Tamsin's personal bank account, disguised as consulting fees." Turn to page 22. You will see the precise liquidation of the driver health reserve. That exact amount was used to purchase a luxury yacht in Miami just 3 weeks ago. One of the senior directors, a man named Harrison who had been a mentor to Stellan, took off his reading glasses and rubbed his eyes. He looked at Stellan with profound disgust. "You stole from the drivers?" Harrison asked, his voice shaking with anger. "We have men breaking their backs out there, and you stole their medical reserves to buy a boat for your mistress? It was an executive bonus restructure." Stellan shouted defensively, desperately trying to spin the narrative. "The funds were reallocated for strategic retention. It is legal." "No, it is grand larceny," Marin corrected sharply. "And it opens this entire board to severe federal liability if we do not act immediately." Stellan looked around the room, his chest heaving, sweat beading on his forehead. He realized he was losing them. He turned to Kalen, his most loyal soldier, his trusted right-hand man. "Kalen, tell them. Tell them about the aggressive growth strategy. Tell them this is just a misunderstanding of the new accounting software." Kalen looked at the spreadsheet in front of him. He looked at the undeniable proof of wire transfers. Then he looked at me. He saw the cold, unyielding resolve in my eyes, and he realized the ship was not just sinking, it was already underwater. Kalen was a survivor. He cared about his own paycheck above all else. Kalen slowly closed his folder. "I am sorry, Stellan," he said quietly, refusing to make eye contact with his former boss. "I had no knowledge of these unauthorized transfers. If you diverted health funds, you did it without my approval." Stellan looked as though he had been stabbed in the chest. "You treacherous coward," he hissed. Marin did not give him time to recover. "As the presiding legal officer, and with the majority shareholder present, I am introducing an emergency motion. The motion is to terminate Stellan's contract as Chief Executive Officer, effective this exact second, with cause." Termination with cause. Those 3 words were the real weapon. Stellan's executive contract included a massive golden parachute, a $20 million severance package if he was ever voted out or let go. But termination with cause, specifically for financial fraud and ethical violations, voided that clause entirely. It meant he walked away with nothing. "You cannot do this to me," Stellan roared, slamming his fists on the table. "I built this company. I am the face of Apex. You need me." I finally spoke, my voice cutting through his hysterical shouting. "You didn't build this company, Stellan. The mechanics built it. The drivers built it. My father's money saved it. And I was the one who held it together while you played pretend in expensive suits. You are just the face on the brochure. And today we are printing a new brochure." I looked at Marin. "I vote in favor of the motion to terminate with cause. With my 65% voting power, the motion carries unilaterally." Marin nodded, making a swift notation on her legal pad. "The motion passes. Stellan, you are officially removed as CEO of Apex Cold Chain Solutions. You are ordered to surrender your corporate phone, your security badge, and your keys immediately. Security will escort you to the ground floor. You are strictly forbidden from contacting any employee or accessing any company systems. Stellan stood frozen at the head of the table. The reality of what had just happened was crashing over him in massive, suffocating waves. He had walked into this room as a king, ready to crown his mistress and laugh at my misery. In less than 20 minutes, he had been stripped of his title, his power, his severance, and his dignity. He was a ruined man. I stood up, smoothing the front of my crimson blazer. I picked up my purse and looked at him one last time. There was no love left. There was no hate left either. Just a profound, hollow emptiness. If you are loving watching this arrogant CEO get exactly what he deserves, please take a quick second to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. It helps me bring you more incredible stories of justice just like this one. My phone buzzed in my hand. It was a text message from Bram, the man I had sold the house to. Message: closing funds are verified. The demolition permits are cleared. My crews are pulling into the driveway right now. We are ready to tear it down. I smiled, slipping the phone into my pocket. I turned my back on Stellan, leaving him to the mercy of the furious board members and the approaching security guards. I have some business to attend to at my estate, I said to Maren. I will be back this afternoon to discuss the transition. I walked out of the boardroom. As I passed the waiting area, Tamsin looked up from her latte, giving me a smug, victorious smile, clearly assuming I had just been thrown out. I didn't say a word to her. I just kept walking to the elevator, knowing that in about 5 minutes, her entire world was going to collapse too. I drove through the familiar, tree-lined streets of my old suburban neighborhood, the adrenaline still coursing hot through my veins. The sky was bright, mocking the dark, heavy events of the day. When I turned the corner onto my street, the sight that greeted me was nothing short of cinematic. Parked along the curb and idling loudly in the massive circular driveway were 3 massive, yellow industrial machines. An excavator, a bulldozer, and a heavy-duty dump truck. A crew of 5 men in hard hats and neon vests were standing near the front porch, reviewing blueprints. And standing right in the middle of the chaos, waving her wooden cane like a furious orchestra conductor, was Vesper. She was screaming at the top of her lungs, her face purple with rage. She was wearing a silk morning gown, her hair perfectly coiffed, looking entirely out of place next to the heavy machinery. "Get these monstrous things off my property!" Vesper shrieked, hitting the massive rubber tire of the excavator with her cane. "I am calling the police. My son is a powerful CEO, and he will have all of you thrown in jail for trespassing." I parked my sedan quietly across the street and stepped out. I walked slowly up the driveway, the crunch of gravel under my shoes drawing her attention. Vesper spun around, her eyes locking onto me. Her expression shifted from outrage to venomous triumph. "You!" she spat, pointing her cane at my chest just like she had at the courthouse hours ago. "Did you hire these thugs to intimidate me? Are you truly this pathetic, Delphine? Call them off right now before I have you arrested." I stopped a few feet away from her, folding my arms. "I didn't hire them, Vesper. The new owner did." Before she could process my words, a tall, burly man in a plaid shirt and a white hard hat walked over, carrying a clipboard. This was Bram. He wasn't a young father looking for a family home. Bram was the owner of an industrial real estate development firm. "Excuse me, ma'am," Bram said politely, his deep voice carrying easily over the rumble of the diesel engines. "Are you Delphine?" I nodded. "I am." Bram extended a massive hand, shaking mine firmly. "Pleasure to meet you in person. The title transfer cleared escrow an hour ago. The property is officially mine. We are just doing the preliminary site walk before we start knocking down the walls." Vesper looked as though she had been struck by lightning. She looked wildly between Bram and me. "Knocking down the walls? What are you talking about? This is a historic, luxury estate. We are remodeling the kitchen next week." Bram looked at her, his brow furrowing in confusion. "Remodeling? Lady, I don't care about the kitchen. I bought this lot for the acreage. The zoning laws here just changed. I am tearing this old house down to the dirt today and paving over the entire lot to build a commercial warehouse for cold storage." Vesper's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She swayed slightly on her feet, leaning heavily on her cane to keep from collapsing. A warehouse. The beautiful, sprawling estate she had treated like her personal palace, the home she had proudly bragged about to all her wealthy friends at the country club, was going to be pulverized into dust and turned into a concrete parking lot for trucks. It was the ultimate, crushing irony. You cannot do this, Vesper whispered, the arrogant venom finally draining out of her voice, replaced by genuine, trembling horror. Stellan owns this house. He took it in the settlement. No, Vesper, I said gently, stepping closer so she could hear every single syllable clearly. Stellan aggressively demanded the condo, the boat, and the cash. He legally forced me to take this house yesterday. He laughed and called it a money pit. So, I took it. It became my sole, private property. And then I immediately sold it to Bram for $2 million in cash. Vesper stared at me, her eyes wide, her mind desperately trying to comprehend the sheer scale of the trap they had blindly walked into. Bram checked his watch. The police have already reviewed the deed, ma'am. You have an eviction notice. My crew gave you 72 hours, but honestly, we are starting the exterior demolition today. You need to go inside and pack whatever you can carry. At that moment, the screech of tires echoed down the street. Stellan's black luxury sedan came tearing around the corner, hopping the curb slightly before slamming on the brakes right behind my car. The door flew open and Stellan stumbled out. He looked absolutely terrible. His expensive suit jacket was gone. His tie was ripped open, his collar stained with sweat. His hair was messy, and he looked like a man who had just run a marathon through hell. He staggered up the driveway, his chest heaving, his eyes wide and frantic. He saw the bulldozers. He saw Bram. He saw me standing there, perfectly calm in my red suit. Stellan! Vesper cried out, reaching a shaking hand toward her son. Thank God you are here. Tell this man to leave. Tell him this is our home. Delphine is lying about selling it. Stellan didn't look at his mother. He didn't look at the bulldozers. He slowly fell to his knees on the gravel driveway, right in front of me. The sharp stones must have dug into his skin, but he didn't seem to care. Delphine, he gasped, his voice breaking into a pathetic, desperate sob. Please, please, I am begging you. Vesper stared at her son on his knees, utterly horrified. Stellan, get up. What are you doing? Tell her to stop this. They froze my accounts, Stellan cried, tears streaming down his face, completely ignoring his mother. The board notified the bank. The feds are looking into the wire transfers. Tamsin left. She packed her bags and left the condo the second she heard I was fired. I have nothing, Delphine. They took my severance. I owe the IRS millions. Please. You have to tell them it was a mistake. You have to give me my job back. Vesper dropped her cane. It clattered loudly against the pavement. Fired? She whispered, her voice barely audible. What do you mean fired? You are the CEO. I looked down at the man kneeling in the dirt. The man who had dismissed my sacrifices. The man who had tried to steal our daughter's future. The man who had looked at me with such immense superiority just a few hours ago. I don't have the power to stop the federal regulators, Stellan, I said softly, my voice devoid of any pity. You made your choices. You stole from our people. Now you have to pay the bill. I turned away from him and walked toward my car. The sound of the massive excavator engine roaring to life filled the air, drowning out the sound of Vesper screaming and Stellan sobbing. The demolition had officially begun. The aftermath of that Friday was a hurricane of brutal consequences that swept through Indianapolis corporate circles. The news of Stellan's immediate termination and the subsequent federal investigation into his embezzlement hit the industry trade papers by Monday morning. The mighty, untouchable king of Apex Logistics had fallen, and he had hit the ground hard. From what Marin told me, the fallout was spectacular. Vesper, realizing her son was now facing massive federal debt and potential prison time, turned on him instantly. The woman who had coddled and spoiled him his entire life slapped him across the face in the driveway of the condo he was being evicted from. She packed her own bags and moved into a small retirement community in Florida, cutting off all contact with him to protect her own meager savings. The flying monkeys, the sycophant executives and country club friends who had enabled Stellan's arrogance for years, scattered like roaches when the lights turn on. Kalen tried to salvage his own job by offering to testify against Stellan, but the board fired him anyway for gross negligence. Tamsin, the young mistress who was supposed to be the new COO, vanished into thin air. The second she realized the yacht was being seized by the authorities and Stellan could no longer pay her fake vendor fees, she blocked his number and moved out of state. Stellan was left entirely, profoundly alone in a cheap motel, waiting for the legal hammer to drop. As for me, I didn't have time to dwell on his misery. I had a company to save. The board unanimously appointed me as the interim chief executive officer. My first act, on my very first day sitting in the massive corner office that used to belong to Stellan, was to call Yora in. We worked late into the night, untangling the financial mess. We immediately fully restored the Driver Health and Wellness Reserve Fund. We reinstated the pension matching program. The next morning, I drove down to the main warehouse. I didn't wear a designer suit. I wore a high-vis safety vest and work boots. I found Oaks, the senior driver who had suffered the heart attack, sitting in the break room. I handed him a priority envelope. Inside was a fully paid authorization for his cardiac rehab program, covered retroactively by the company. Oaks, a tough, grizzled man who had driven trucks for 20 years, broke down in tears and hugged me. That was the moment I truly realized the power of what I had done. I hadn't just destroyed a bad man, I had saved a community of good people. Under my leadership, the company didn't just stabilize, it thrived. The drivers and mechanics, knowing they were finally respected and protected by someone who understood their struggles, worked with a renewed sense of immense loyalty. Our efficiency numbers skyrocketed. I negotiated new, massive contracts without needing to play golf or buy expensive dinners. I just delivered exactly what I promised. 2 months passed in a blur of hard work and quiet healing. Then came the annual Apex Cold Chain Solutions Employee Appreciation Banquet. It was held in a massive, beautiful botanical garden pavilion. There were no VIP tables this year. No tiered seating. The mechanics sat next to the executives. Yora sat next to me. The atmosphere was light, joyous, and genuinely celebratory. We had just finished serving dinner when I saw him. Stellan was standing near the back entrance of the pavilion. He looked like a ghost. He was wearing an old, ill-fitting suit. He had lost weight, his face drawn and pale. He looked decades older. He was standing near the shadows, watching the room full of people laughing and celebrating, people who used to hang on his every word, who now didn't even notice he was there. My heart didn't skip a beat. I didn't feel a surge of anger or a rush of triumphant adrenaline. I just felt nothing. Marin, who was sitting next to me, noticed my gaze. She tensed, reaching for her phone. "I will have security remove him immediately," she whispered. I shook my head gently, placing a hand over hers. "No. Leave him." Stellan slowly began to walk toward my table. The few employees who did notice him stepping out of the shadows immediately stopped talking, their faces hardening into masks of pure disgust. They turned their backs to him, forming a silent, impenetrable wall of rejection. He had to weave through the tables, looking utterly pathetic. He finally reached the edge of my table. He stood there, his hands trembling slightly, waiting for me to acknowledge him. He was waiting for me to yell at him. He was waiting for me to gloat, to rub my victory in his face, to show him that I still cared enough to hate him. I didn't look at him. I calmly picked up my glass of water, took a sip, and turned my attention back to Yora, continuing our conversation about the new fleet routing software as if the air next to me was completely empty. "Delphine," Stellan whispered, his voice cracking, thick with desperate emotion. "Please. I just want to talk. I want to apologize." I did not turn my head. I smiled at Yora, nodding at his technical explanation. "Delphine, please," Stellan begged, stepping closer, his shadow falling across my plate. "I am ruined. I have nothing left. I know I was wrong. I know I was arrogant. Please, just look at me. Just give me 5 minutes." The silence at our table was heavy, but it was not the silence of fear. It was the crushing, suffocating silence of total irrelevance. Marin finally looked up at him, her eyes cold. "You're trespassing, Stellan. Leave this building right now, or I will have you arrested in front of everyone you used to employ." Stellan stared at the side of my face for a long, agonizing minute. He realized, in that terrible moment, that the ultimate punishment wasn't losing the money or the company. The ultimate punishment was realizing that I didn't even hate him anymore. He had become entirely invisible to me. He lowered his head, his shoulders slumping in total defeat, and turned around. He walked out the back doors into the dark night, escorted quietly by 2 large security guards who didn't say a single word to him. Later that evening, it was time for the closing remarks. I walked up onto the stage, adjusting the microphone. The applause that greeted me was deafening, echoing off the glass walls of the pavilion. I looked out at the sea of faces, the drivers, the mechanics, the dispatchers, the accountants. I did not mention Stellan. I did not mention the divorce, or the embezzlement, or the drama. I simply said, this company was built on the backs of people who work in the cold, who work in the dark, who sacrifice their time to keep the world moving. For years, the spotlight was pointed in the wrong direction. Tonight, and for every single night moving forward, that spotlight belongs to you. Thank you for your trust, and thank you for your hard work. As I stepped down from the stage, I felt a pair of arms wrap tightly around me. It was Lyra. She had come to the banquet. She was crying, but this time, they were not tears of anger. "I am so sorry, Mom," she whispered into my shoulder, holding me tight. "I read the court documents. I saw what he did. I am so sorry I didn't believe you. I was just so blind." I hugged her back, resting my chin on her head, closing my eyes. "I know, sweetheart. It is okay. We are okay now." Life became wonderfully, remarkably peaceful after that. I bought a small, beautiful cabin sitting quietly by a lake, miles away from the noise of the city. No massive estate, no marble floors, no fake country club friends. Just a porch, a good book, and the quiet sound of the water. Looking back on it now, people often ask me if tearing Stellan's life down to the absolute studs brought me happiness. The truth is, destroying him didn't heal me. Selling the house didn't fix my broken heart. What truly healed me was the profound realization that I no longer had to beg for respect from people who were entirely incapable of giving it. Healing came from taking my power back. It came from understanding that my worth was never tied to his validation, his title, or his mother's approval. Many people on the internet have told me I was too ruthless. They say that stripping a 54-year-old man of his entire career, his money, and his reputation was too cruel, regardless of what he did to me. But Reddit, what do you think? Was I a ruthless monster for executing that plan, or did I simply take back exactly what belonged to me? Let me know your honest thoughts down in the comments. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you found yourself nodding along, if you have ever had to fight to realize your own true value, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video. Your support means the world to me. See you in the next story.